It's Why Wells Fail. We're live here. I'm Steve Brown, your host. Our expert, our CEO, Refined Completions, Lloyd Brown. Welcome to your show, Lloyd. How's it going?
It's all the good today, Steve. All the good.
Yeah. Dynamic day is what I heard you say.
I think that has absolutely been the case.
Interesting. Well, what a great segue. It says right here, why do we care about dynamic equilibrium? Did something happen today in your day that disturbed your static equilibrium? And insert dynamic equilibrium, and then tell us, why do we even care about that in a well downhole situation?
Well, dynamic means it's many times it's not what you expected, right?
Yeah.
And when years ago, I had a guy that he said when somebody asked you, how's your day? He said, incredible. And then just stop, because it can be incredibly good. It can be incredibly bad. It can be incredibly mundane, right?
Mm-hmm.
But it gives a sense of activity and mindset. So dynamic means it's not boring, right?
Mm-hmm.
But when it comes into equilibrium is a place of balance. And so dynamic equilibrium is kind of it's a play on words if you think about it. How do you have something that's in balance, but it's dynamically in balance, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or in equilibrium. And so to do that, I think of a guy on a high wire,
That's exactly what I was thinking.
and they got to be there, right? They've got their
Mm-hmm.
little bar in their hand, and they're constantly going across it. That's kind of where we are in understanding what happens when we frack a well and we take geology that it's in a close place to being in static equilibrium, where there's not a lot of change going on. And if there's change going on, it's going to be seen in years, thousands of years, 10,000s of years for it to really change, because it took it millions upon millions of years to get to where it is today. And so when that is disrupted, dynamic equilibrium is, how do we find that balance, that bar that allows us to get what we want? For years we've said, give the rock what it wants and you'll get what you want. But we didn't have a real specific way to identify what that is. We had no way to measure that. And in the process of the last, really 15, 16 years of my life, and in some ways my whole career, starting out in industrial water treating and finding the place of balance for water. It's like, do you have a pool? You ever had a pool?
Yeah.
If you let the chemicals get out of balance, it turns green,
Mm-hmm.
or it turns cloudy, or it starts to stink. There's a balance. And in pool chemistry and water chemistry, we look for a place that we have it in dynamic equilibrium. It's not causing one problem or another. It's kind of in a place that when you go swimming, your hair doesn't turn green, your skin doesn't turn white, and that you don't smell too bad when you get out, right? That's when you know you've done a good job in your swimming pool. Well, the same thing happens in geology when we go in and we disrupt the place that it's been, this place of rest. That's kind of what you think about when you're in equilibrium. You're in rest. I see the yoga, they're practicing finding their equilibrium. And that's what our whole purpose behind our process is to do. It's to find that place that the geology is not creating the process that it's taking to get back into equilibrium once we fracked it are not disrupting the ability of it to give up its resource, the oil and the gas, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so that's been a real function of learning and how to measure what is dynamic equilibrium, and creating a process and a series of protocols that all of those protocols, you can call them laboratory tests, all those laboratory tests end up pointing you in the same direction. You don't have one test saying, hey, this is north, and then another one saying, no, it's south. They have to be congruent. And then creating finally something that replicates what's really happening downhole, and understanding, all right, are we stabilizing this to a point that it's almost back to where it was before we fracked it and we're not going to get anything out of it that we want? Or are we putting it in a place where we're going to maximize that recoverable resource because we're mitigating detrimental effects of the geology trying to get back to that static equilibrium? And so dynamic is really it's that finding that place that we're balancing as we're walking across that tightrope. And in some geologies, we don't need a really long one, and there's no winds that we're dealing with. You see those guys when they are going between buildings, or if they're going over long distances over a canyon or whatever it is, there's different dynamics that are trying to throw them off. The same thing happens in geology. And there's things like clay swelling for one, or fines migration, or production of acid gases like CO2 and H2S. It's the reprecipitation of scale from the reaction of these acid gases. It's any of the above based on whether our water is fresh water or it's produced water, and how it responds to the environment that it goes in. It's atmospheric oxygen going into an environment that's been completely void of oxygen, also known as anaerobic, a place without. And there's all these disruptions that happen when we do that. And how do we minimize and mitigate and not exacerbate? Because that's one of the other things that we've discovered is you can get too much of a good thing. You can have too much salt going into a well. You can have too much total dissolved solids, called TDS. Or you can have not enough. You can have different additives. You can have too much of a surfactant in there when there's a right balance. Too much increases the rate of disruption instead of bringing to a dynamic equilibrium. So anything that we're putting in there, we need to know the cause and the effect of what it does in that specific rock type, based on the average of what the water looks like that we're going to do that, and then find the right balance of chemicals to give us that dynamic equilibrium that allows the production of oil and gas. And so, go ahead.
So we're going downhole, and this environment has been the same for years and years and years. Then we're creating this pressure, and it's sending out all of these cracks.
Mm-hmm.
And then in a perfect world, the oil and gas flows back because of that pressure, like pushing stuff through a filter in a way.
Mm-hmm.
And so the dangers in there are creating an environment that is not conducive to allowing that oil and gas to flow the best back to the top.
Right. Well, really, it's back into that wellbore, right? So basically, you take a straw and you lay it straight. And
Hmm.
that, there's, by the way, no such thing as a straight well bore. They go up and down and around. But you want that oil to migrate into that well bore so it can get to what we call the hill. The hill is where the vertical part of the well comes down, and there's a place that is where we set our pumps
Hmm.
to help artificially lift that oil maybe 1 or 2 miles back to the surface.
Wow.
And you want it to get into this one space, that we've cracked all the rock around it, to recover those resources. And so you want to make sure that all of these micro highways, micro fractures
Mhm.
stay open that allow that oil and gas to migrate into that wellbore.
It's trying to get back to the way it was. And then you introduce these fluids, and then it can get soggy. It can get, the wrong acid or something like that. Corrosive. Tell me all the ways it can go bad if you don't have this environment.
Well, first of all, the geology in chemical terms, it's in a reduced state, which
Okay.
means that it's in a more balanced, reduced state. It's something that everything is concentrated to a place that it can't concentrate anymore. And then you come in with something that has an oxidative state. So it's in an active a state of oxidation, because we use compressed air and fluids to break all this rock up. And then the additives that you put in it, you bring up acid. A lot of companies, especially the pressure pumping companies, like you to use acid to create artificial etching into the rock so it'll start to break open and go. Well, one thing we know is that is hyper aggressive to the geology, and we don't like the consequences of that. And so you either have to treat to mitigate the consequences of using acid, or in a perfect world, you'd never use it.
Hmm.
So that's one of the things. And then you're putting in a sand. Almost always there's a sand, and the sand has its own unique properties and can be part of the problem as well as part of the solution to get the hydrocarbon out. So there's so many different components and factors to it. It's absolutely amazing what's happened over really the last 25 years of the kind of horizontal well development and fracking that we've seen. It's just amazing, the technology, and we're continuing to move the needle to get more resource out of that rock.
The odds seem pretty high that you would get that formula wrong if you don't have a process. Because you're just guessing, literally in the dark.
Well, and there's been a level of knowledge that has gotten us to the place that we are right now, and it's been economical. And today oil saw an upswing since there's been this pause in the tariffs, and just like we all like predictability in knowing what our costs are. We like predictability in knowing what our income is. And those of us that choose our profession in the world of commodities, whether we're farmers or work in the mineral industry, the energy resource industry, all of us are looking for a place of, if you think about it, dynamic equilibrium. We know what we know.
Yeah.
And we know our cost inputs, we know our revenues, and it gives us a profit so we can survive and go on to the next day. I kind of went down a rabbit hole there, but if you really think about it, it's the same thing. It's the finding a place of dynamic equilibrium that allows us to continue to get better over time. And that's what we're doing. But yeah, early on, we did a lot of things wrong. And today, probably still do.
So, but to have a system or a framework to follow, because you're entering a zone, and you're gonna have to dance, because some surprise or some situation is going to come up that maybe you didn't plan for, maybe you didn't predict. But if you have a system or a framework in place, then it increases your odds that you're going to optimize as well to return a better investment, or a better return on that investment that the stakeholders invested in this.
Absolutely. And it's funny you said that. So statistics, right?
Mm-hmm.
The greater your population, the more accurate your prediction in statistics.
Mm-hmm.
Since 2014, we've gathered water on every well that we've fracked, on what went in the hole and what's come out of the hole. And we've built an enormous statistical population. And that's one of the benefits that we have. And now with AI, we're actually even able to learn much faster and really do a deeper dive into the analytics of what we have. And that has created a much better level of understanding. Hey, this was not in dynamic equilibrium. What we did, 10, 12, 15 years ago, we thought we were doing really good, but man, now we look back and we're able to see that no, we weren't, because we have some constants that we're able to measure now, which tie back to our patented process. If you have a known and you have something that is a mathematical constant that you can utilize, which we do, that is the way that that it gives you the ability to move and learn much faster.
When you're talking to folks that are considering the refined way to go about this, if I'm a sales guy working for you, what are some of the mindsets that I'm running into?
Well, first and foremost, I think the mindset of our team is transitioning from being a chemical salesman to a process communicator, of helping, because the product doesn't matter if you don't know how it's going to perform before you use it.
Mm-hmm.
That's called a wish, right? We do something, or it's maybe an educated guess. We're a company that, and this is the hard part, is not only internally but externally helping everybody recognize that we're going from a good educated guess to sound science and data to help us to continually improve. And now, because of what we've discovered and patented in our process patent, we now have the ability to move much faster, measure much faster, and not provide an educated guess, but a prescriptive solution. And that's our prescriptive solution is what's going to provide dynamic equilibrium. Because if you go too far and you go to static equilibrium, you leave all the resource in the rock. You go back to where you were. And that can definitely happen. You can definitely, you can leave everything there and just get a nice water well that's expensive.
Mm.
And that has happened.
So it feels like, used to hear these predictions about where medicine was going, and that, right now we'll go to the doctor and he'll prescribe Lipitor or whatever it is. But where medicine seems to be going, what technology is, doing all these labs, deep labs on you, and then going and putting in the results of your labs, and then it creates a unique formulation instead of just an off-the-shelf, pre-made, one-size-fits-all for a particular diagnosis, right? And that's the way the industry has been, basically, that someone makes the diagnosis, and then they go, here's a pre-made thing that's a one-size-fits-all for what we think this diagnosis is downhole.
Yeah, and you can't blame. Everybody wants to get to a manufacturing process, right?
Mm-hmm.
You want high effectiveness and efficiency, capital efficiency, and your accounting folks, they want predictability and cost.
Mm-hmm.
Your CEO wants predictability and profit. You can't necessarily long-term focus on solving your cost if you're not making sure that you're getting the largest amount of recoverable resource. Look at the size of a cow today. I mean, the genetics, to your point about genetics creating cattle that consistently produce prime beef, for example, there's all kinds of things. There's genetics in what we're looking at for our crops. There's the way that we look at geology is like understanding the genetics of this geology, the mineral species, and what are the reactives of this, and then how do we create that specific prescription for that well and or that geology in that region. Some of the gene therapies that you're seeing and the immunotherapies are taking what's actually already in our body to heal it and to make real changes. And the same thing is when we discovered, we used to think, hey, we put produced water downhole, you're gonna have a commingling of unlike waters, and you're gonna scale the well shut because we're applying surface water management and thought processes and applying that to fracking. Well, now we know, hey, if the water looks like the reservoir has been used to, it responds a lot better and it doesn't get near as disrupted. So that is the first step in a process of having dynamic equilibrium.
The other day, I was talking with someone, they were considering, working with us, and his comment was, well, I'm a numbers guy, and then the numbers don't lie. But my comment back to him is, as long as we're measuring the right numbers, and that seems to be what you're talking about. Are we measuring the right things to get the right outcome downhole?
Yeah, if you're measuring something, let's just take lithium. Lithium's a metal that everybody knows about because of batteries today.
Mm-hmm.
One thing that's in a lot of produced water is lithium. Some of it's low concentration, some of it's high. But is there a correlation in measuring lithium to how much oil we're going to get out of the reservoir? Maybe. But today, we've not seen a correlation of how much is in the water versus the amount of oil and gas that we're being produced. It may be an indicator of other things about the geology, but it's not necessarily, are we going to have a successful, highly producing, low cost producing oil well? So to your point, you need to know what you're measuring, why you're measuring it, because of the impact that it has.
So if we're satisfying that aspect of the investors in this project or in this well, what's the long-term benefit, assuming they buy into your framework? They're following frameworks. They're trying to reduce risk and making bad decisions. They're following this proven framework. You have a framework that fits in that process. What's the payoff should those sink?
Well, they should, because one of the things that investors and financial partners look for is the predictability. Stock market's a perfect example of predictability. We've been through a really disruptive time. The market was fracked on the Liberation Day, right? and yesterday or this morning, we got some dynamic equilibrium that happened to the market.
I don't think they were using the word fracked. I don't think that was the term they were using.
Others might use a different connotation of that letter, but I'm not the one to do that. But it's true. We're creatures that like predictability, and if we're focused on cost predictability, just on cost, we probably are going to miss out on a lot of the opportunity to have something that produces a lot longer. It's like, do you want to spend how much ever Apple is today, or do you want to go find the penny stock that's out there that could be the next Apple? Are you looking for dividends? If you are, you're looking for Exxon, right? These guys, they pay dividends. I remember at coming in probably mid to late 2020, early 2021, I was like, told my financial advisor, go buy me as much of these 4 oil and gas stocks because they're at historic lows. And these are the ones I want, because no matter what, I'm going to make a dividend at the worst, and I've got all of this upside. Well, that's what, when we look at our geology, is the resource there? We get to measure, and we can tell you, hey, Steve, you know what? This is really type 2, type 3 rock. This is not it's going to be economical, but it's not going to be the thing that's going to put you in retirement. Or this is some of the best geology we've ever seen. It is oozing with hydrocarbon, but we need to be really careful with it, because for it to give up all of that, you can mess this one up and still make an economical well, but you're going to leave a lot behind. Or you have this other one, you can mess it up and you're going to have it'll never be able to produce enough to pay for itself. You need to understand multiple functions. And one of those that we know, we need to make sure that the resource is available to get out. And our partners, the operators, most of them know what type of geology they have. But sometimes you land a wellbore and it's not near what you thought it was going to be.
So how does your process, give me some examples of, so let's say I'm listening and I've been feeling, I didn't know I could expect this, but I've been feeling there's a better way to frack these pads, right? And I'm in charge of doing these pads, and I've been feeling this, but it's risky. It's risky. I didn't know there was an option, but then now there's kind of risky to bring in this new option that most people don't know about. What's the process that you have that will reduce the risk that I'm needing to get past? There's these fears in your head. How do you resolve that?
Well, how well do you know your rock, and the service provider that you're using? How well do they know the rock? Do they know what are the things that when it's disrupted that it's going to benefit you, and what are the detriments that you need to inhibit using and putting back into equilibrium so that well will produce a long period of time? The good news is the risk is really low for the overall cost of the well. And one of the things that we just recently discovered is we were able to optimize our base blended chemistries, that are performing over a much broader spectrum of geology, and it is competitive with many of the, what I want to call,
off the shelf.
well, off the shelf or commodities, really the ones that are focused on, hey, Steve, you said you need a scale inhibitor. Here's a $4 scale inhibitor. Hey, and oh, you just want a surfactant? Yeah, here's your $5 surfactant, and here's a, oh, you're worried about a little bit of clay swelling. Hey, here's a $6 clay additive, clay swelling additive. And do you know if all of these work well together? Because what we found is a lot of them, they don't like each other. And one may cause a problem that another one has to make up for. And that's been another part of our process. We've been able to look at the impact, because you can overtreat with many of the components. And you can believe that you're getting dynamic equilibrium when you're doing nothing but disrupting it at a higher level. And that's been one of our most recent, greatest discoveries that my partner Jeff Snyder, that he and Justin that works with us, they found, and they're like, too much of a good thing's a bad thing.
It's kind of like that frustration. You go to the doctor with your parent, and they've got these medications with one doctor and other medications with another doctor, and there could be canceling each other out or aggravating the situation.
Steve, that's an absolute great way to communicate that. And you know what? It's funny. A lot of operators will say, "All right, we're going to buy the friction reducer or the cross linker from the pressure pumping company, and then we're going to get this component from this company and this one from this one." And you don't know that all three of them work real well together. And they send it to some laboratory, and the laboratory throws it all in a blender, looks at it, and goes, "Oh, yeah, it's fine. They're compatible." What are they missing?
They're not taking the geology into consideration.
That's right. They don't look at it. It's like years ago, there used to be people that believed they needed an FR breaker, and which is friction reducer. And so companies were pumping sodium chloride in the frac downhole, which is an extremely aggressive oxidizer, or they were using high concentrations of chlorine dioxide, which that's what sodium chloride creates when it reacts. And it's funny, all these guys would go, "Look at this, it breaks this really well." And they put it in a beaker, and man, sure enough, it broke that FR like that. But the minute we took ground core up and we put it in there and we shook it all together, and you put the same amount of breaker in there, it went to the geology first and the polymer second. The geology reacted with it much faster. And so they were spending something thinking they were getting a benefit when it wasn't doing anything. It's actually causing a real detriment. So that's the same thing that you said. Hey, if you don't let your doctor know, this doctor and this doctor know what you're doing, and somebody, the pharmacist or somebody's going, "Oh, Steve, man, you can't do this. You're going to have a heart attack." That happens all the time. Our wells have heart attacks.
Wow. So the name of this patent granted
intend to grant patent.
Yeah. What's the name?
The Pathfinder process.
All right. Pathfinder process. And this is patented in the U.S. and
it's in the intended to grant state in the European Union, out of Germany, and it has been filed in the United States and multiple countries.
So perfect timing. About to be the biggest push for energy production ever in our lifetime is about to happen, or is happening, even
It
as
is.
we speak. And so what a great time if you're in charge of producing these wells. What a great time to learn that there's a process that's the same type of business process that you run your business with to reduce risk and make good decisions. And now this place that you had to guess in the dark or just wing it or mix it in a beaker and hope it works. Now there's a predictable process that you can go through with refined solutions. Lloyd, how do they connect with you, or how do they start a conversation about whether this is a good consideration for their situation?
Well, my email address is lloyd.brown@refinedcompletions.com, or our website has a contact us place that they can hit it there, and we will respond, and or hit us up on LinkedIn, or we have our YouTube accounts as well. I mean, whatever platform that they feel best to hit us up on, we're gonna respond.
Awesome. So we started off in a static equilibrium, this conversation, injected some chaos, and now here we are at a dynamic equilibrium, wrapping up another great conversation with Lloyd Brown, Refined Completions. Why wells fail? Well, why do they fail? It's because most of the time we're winging it. We're just doing the best we know. And now there's an option that most people aren't aware of, that is an actual framework to understand better the geology and the unique formula for that situation to optimize your oil and well production.
That's right.
All right, Lloyd, great show. Good job, man. It's like you're a movie star. You do this all the time?
All the time.
All right, and that's a wrap.